mighty warriors. It's Alicia again, and today's scripture comes from Matthew 20:16. And it reads, "So the last shall be first, and the first last. For many be called, but few chosen." So the reason why I wanted to talk about this particular scripture is because I was pondering it. And I felt like the Lord revealed something to me, and I was reading a commentary and it was confirmed. And so I wanted to discuss this concept of 2016 Matthew, where it says, "So the last shall be first, and the first last." So when we look at God's work with Israel and with the church, we understand that a lot of times people will be called at different times in their lives to serve God. I know with me, I was always a believer. I remember being a believer as a child, but I don't really feel like God activated me. And I want to say that when I use that word activated, I mean he touched me in a way that woke me up. And I feel like he didn't really do that for me until I was in my mid 30s. And I remember just being so excited to serve him, and still am. And so just really enthusiastic about serving him. And I remember going back to my church, a church that I had belonged to since I was 14, but really wasn't active in. And then all of a sudden, I just wanted to be active. I wanted to be in the choir. I wanted to sing in the praise team. And I remember sort of really feeling like the people around me were holding me back and just really not 100% for me, and just kind of like, who does she think she is, right? And I remember that after having enough of that feeling of not necessarily not being welcome, I felt welcome, but just not people not being as enthusiastic as I was, and how it sort of made me feel out of place sometimes, and then eventually made me feel uncomfortable, made me feel like others were not for me, they were actually becoming against me. And I remember slowly shrinking, sort of like going from really enthusiastic to just kind of shrinking. And when I read this particular scripture, it really that feeling sort of resonates with me. You know, sometimes the people who are called last are just so grateful or just so enthusiastic that they are gung ho, right? And then sometimes the people who are called first, they just become very jaded, not as enthusiastic, and then sometimes just can be very, almost, I don't want to say detrimental, but can kind of keep those people from really charging forth with the mission that God has for them. And this also resonated with me when you look at Israel and how Israel is just so excited because they've been chosen by God. You know, they're his people. But then when Jesus comes to give them the good news, they reject him. And then if we look at Revelation, eventually, you know, he will reestablish his program with Israel, but it's after the church age. So the first is going to become last, because ultimately they rejected him, and then he had to put them aside and start to work with the church. And then you have the church who was last to be called, but now you know, they are pushing his church forward, and they are being, enthusiastic. And so I just wanted to talk to people about this particular scripture, because if you are someone who has, not been especially active in the beginning, just don't give up. Just be faithful and keep working at it, because the scriptures say that we will all have the same inheritance, and the last shall become first, and the first shall become last. Until next time.